Yeah. So we have we got one of these raised desks, raised L desks. So it's kind of cool.
Nice. So
So
you're
next,
standing?
yeah, I'm standing right now. I prefer to stand. I actually stood if you in the last video, but I was downstairs on my top dresser. When I talk, I have to stand, and also I just prefer to stand anyway. So
Well, dude, you command the room, dude. You can't do that sitting.
thanks.
So what's new since I last talked to you? Besides,
um, just that. Also, I did that San Jose State orientation. So I signed up for my classes. So I'm officially enrolled as a university student again.
dude, I
So
can tell.
I don't know if I ever told you, but many years back, I got an associate's degree, but it was
Yeah,
specific for transfer, right? And so even after all these years, it still worked. So I was able to use that to transfer into state. So 2 years of sociology with a minor in race and ethnic studies, minor in Japanese. Sorry, concentration in race and ethnic studies, minor in Japanese, and then I'm going to flip right into a master's for linguistics and just kind of do the damn thing. So I'm looking at some pretty intense schooling for the next 3 years.
good man. Good man.
Yeah,
Yeah, dude. Fucking universities.
not it's not all gravy, but you know how it is out there.
Yeah, I do.
What's
Shit,
new with
man. Well, since the last time we talked, there was I think the Rayshard Brooks
you?
situation. Uh, doesn't seem like things are well. It seems like maybe things are calming down a little bit, but I think in general there's still a lot of water that's ready to boil over.
I mean, especially when you talk about these 5 Black individuals who committed suicide,
Oh yeah,
and we know that Black people will never commit suicide hanging themselves, factually. I mean, you can't say factually, but I mean, I would bet my bottom dollar on the fact that those are certainly not
I mean
suicide.
it's like if you're playing a game of roulette and the option is you can bet that every number will hit or just pick one, like you're gonna take the odds and bet every other number because the odds are severely great that you're gonna hit versus the one off chance, the one anecdotal story of, a number coming up or a Black person hanging themselves from a tree specifically, or
Specifically, right?
or from anything really. Yeah.
It's disgusting. It's sort of on the Atlanta case, Elmer Brooks case. It's like, or the Rayshard Brooks. I'm sorry. It's really early in the morning. I think this is just another example again of where you have a police officer who is, or a couple of police officers. I think we actually talked about this last time, who are a little upset that somebody's not paying attention to them, not listening to them, and somebody dies that doesn't have to die. What I don't understand is he's drunk, right? He's trying to flee his own. He's trying to leave his own car behind. Like, at what point can you just let him go home? Guess what? You have his license plate. You know exactly where this fool lives. You can't just go swoop his ass up in the morning.
I
You
mean,
have
dude,
to shoot him right there.
or fucking, I mean, if you're really worried about him possibly sneaking back and picking up his car on, at some point in the night, you could just have him sit there and call AAA or some tow company and have them tow the car home, because I'm pretty sure he would be much happier to take a $200 tow bill versus being arrested versus for sure being shot in the back.
Well, I mean, like I said, get him. He should be arrested for DUI. There's no question about that. And I want to make that perfectly clear. He broke the law. He was drunk in a drive-through, right? He should be arrested. But if he's fleeing on foot, you don't necessarily need to do that right now. He's not a violent criminal at this point, right? I don't know what his history specifically says, but at this specific point, he's not a violent criminal. He's a drunk guy trying to run, stupidly fleeing with his car. You know where he lives. You know his address. There's really no reason why you can't, at the worst case scenario, just let him go home and go get him in the morning. Like, he's not going to disappear from you. You know what I'm saying? He's not going to flee the fucking country. He doesn't have to die. Or worst case, just follow him a few more blocks while he's trying to stupidly run home, and you get the whole force at his ass. But you don't need to shoot this guy, even if he's got a taser. That's not going to do anything to anybody. Let's be realistic. But this is just another example where you have cops with fat egos who cannot let the fact of someone disobeying them go. It's disgusting. I spent a lot of this week watching videos of just bad situations where people, and it's not just people of color, but it's people in general, who are getting abused by police officers simply most of the time because they don't listen.
Yeah.
right? Or they're not like compliant. But a lot of times they're very much compliant and they're getting excessive force use. So I don't know. I think police officers feel like they just have to be aggro in every situation possible. And
They don't
it's
want the veneer of their authority to be cracked
exactly.
by somebody who can get the better of them, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we talked about this last time too, and that's a psychological aspect is what kind of people become police officers. I mean, if you think about the role in itself, it's like what kind of people would want to do that, right? We differentiate that between soldiers. People want to join the military for all sorts of different reasons. It has nothing to do with ego, right? A lot of people want to serve their country. A lot of people want to defend their freedoms, and that is very respectable and honorable. But I feel like when you have police officers, there's very limited reasons as to why. And again, of course, a lot of police officers don't join because they're bullies. I get that. But I feel like a lot of individuals do. And that brotherhood of police officers, that's an example of what I'm talking about, where we're going to quit the force because we can't. And this is what's happening in Atlanta right now. They're not responding to calls. So you mean to tell me that people refuse to do their jobs because they're not allowed to get away with murder? I'm trying to figure out where the logic in that is. It's a cry me a fucking river, bro. Like sometimes I gotta help a bad customer at work. I don't get to just quit my job.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea that you get to just abstain from doing your job. I mean, I get it, right? Your job's hard. Most of the time, people are already in a hypersensitive state. They don't want to deal with you because they know there's a high probability of something bad happening, whether it's getting a ticket or something far worse, right? So I totally can understand and empathize with the feelings of being nervous or being put off, and understanding that the situation that you're in and the job that you're in is incredibly, at times, chaotic and hard to navigate. But when compared to construction workers, for instance, you're far more likely to die as a construction worker in a construction accident than you are as a police officer in the line of duty. And I understand that you don't want to compare apples and oranges because one job is inherently more dangerous because of the hypersensitive nature of the people that you're coming in contact with. So the opportunity for conflict is significantly higher, at least on a person to person level. But in terms of jobs that are dangerous, construction workers are far more likely to experience injury or maiming or death in a
Bro,
lot
go ask Joe
of.
Exotic. Being a tiger tamer is like even worse than all that shit. But like, bro, like you don't get to just like not feed your
Speaking of
tiger.
that, I actually was unfortunately shown the first 2 episodes and had to finish the whole fucking thing, dude. And I am kind of angry at myself for giving Netflix my time and giving
Dude, I
him.
saw the funniest meme today. It was like, it's funny that in 2020, the only thing that we can agree on is that Carol Baskins killed her husband. The only thing that we can agree on.
Oh, bro, she did not. I did
You
not
don't,
believe.
you
No,
don't think she killed her husband?
nope.
Uh,
Dude, I mean, I think the dude is the dude that she was first married to that suddenly disappeared was so rich and so wealthy that if he wanted to make it look like that he was killed or whatever, he could probably do it. And he had talked to people before he quote unquote disappeared that he was planning on throwing everything behind and just starting a new life in Costa Rica or whatever. So,
no, maybe.
I'm not here to say that she couldn't have killed him, and I'm pretty sure that there was a not so thorough investigation on it. But the guy has so many resources, and she's effectively a public figure, right? And they couldn't catch her. She doesn't seem like the type of fucking evil-minded genius that could get away with some huge murder for hire plot.
You mean that bitch Carol Baskins?
That bitch Carol Baskin, because she ain't smart. She ain't smart. She just marries really smart guys.
No, I mean, in and of itself, that's intelligence. I absolutely think she's smart. I mean, if you know how to play the game, you know how to play the system, you're just as smart as somebody with a high IQ. Let's be real.
Well,
It's all about survival.
there's a fine line between sociopathy and genius.
That's right. Oh, fuck. But yeah, no, to your point, it's the same tragedies over and over. It's not going to change. We have this flavor of the month, and everybody's going to be, like I said last time, everybody's going to be really, really, really excited to share the Black Lives Matter story and be a part of the movement. And it's very, very muchly appreciated. But in 2 weeks, something new is going to pop up, right? So 2020 will give us July's flavor of the month. And
We are effectively fucking, when it comes to shiny objects, we're like dogs, man. You could have us sitting still, and as soon as a squirrel runs by, we're fucking chasing that.
we're done. We're chasing the squirrel, bro.
On.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can sit when my master tells me to sit, but then I see another dog and it's like time to go sniff a butt. That's literally what America kind of sums up to, right?
Yeah. What's kind of sickening though is knowing that there are still folks out there that are using the occasional anecdote from a famous celebrity who is of a similar pigment to you that will come out and say, well, you see, here's the reason why we shouldn't use these dead black men and women as martyrs, because, you know, Rayshard Brooks was in jail and was a bad guy, and George Floyd, you know, used a fake $20 bill and was also a bad guy, and all this shit. And it's like, why does this happen whenever a person of color gets arrested? The first thing that comes out is not about how he was a great father or, you know, a great mentor to young kids about not getting involved in gangs, right? The first thing that comes out is, well, we don't want to use him as a from those particular pundits is, well, he wasn't a great guy, so we shouldn't use him as a martyr. But is any of that, I mean, is any of that reason for someone to get killed in such a almost a trivial situation? And of course, none of these situations are trivial in their own right, but when compared to some of the things that you see happening in the white community among people that look like me, like Brock Turner, for instance, how does that guy just get 3 months in jail for rape with witnesses, whereas a guy falls asleep in a Wendy's parking lot drive-through and, you know, is pretty much entirely respectful and, you know, giving the benefit, and is immediately being told, instead of being given a ticket or just a summons to come to court for his transgressions, just needlessly killed, when I think they could have handled the situation without escalating the situation.
Yeah, I don't know. At some point, I think people need to understand that if you're in a position where you're being, you know, tackled and subdued by two men, and you don't feel it's lawful, at this point, I think you have the right to sort of defend yourself, because it, you know, you don't know what's going to happen. And we know that there are a lot of fucking crazy people out there. And unfortunately, quite a few of these people work for the police force. So just because they're supposed to protect you doesn't mean they're actually going to. And I know myself, like I'm really nervous that, and it's not being a person of color, this is just being a person in general. I'm really nervous that I'm ever going to be in a situation where I'm being subdued by police officers and I don't know where they're going to take me or what they're going to do to me, because you don't fucking know, right? And so I think at some point we have to understand that his drive to defend himself should be justified. But I don't know. To your point, I don't know why we do this. You know, Felicity Huffman is another example, right? She paid off Harvard to send her kids there, and she was what, given
She
like
had
a
a few months
fine of
in
like
jail, and by the same token, there was a homeless black woman who
woman.
changed her address so that her 6-year-old child could go to a better school in a better
Could
community,
escape,
and was
change that,
given,
could escape systemic racism, right? Because we know
yeah,
school funding comes from the amount of taxes from that community, right? We know
well, and
this.
not even just the taxes, but the actual, you know, funding from individual benefactors, right? So if you're someone who's fortunate enough to be brought up or even just born in a upper middle class area, like let's compare East Palo Alto in the 90s to Palo Alto in the 90s, right? Those schools in East Palo Alto, they're getting whatever their share is of the district that they're in, given the property taxes in that district, right? So if it's a
Mhm.
bunch of shit fucking houses, and I don't mean that as a disrespect to the people that live there, but they were not well kept. It was basically slumlord central. So those tax dollars going to those schools was a fraction of what was being given by the parents that inhabit houses in the Palo Alto.
Literally right across the highway,
Yeah,
less
I mean,
less
we're talking
than
like
less
a
than
hundred. We're talking like
200 feet
100 feet.
away.
Yeah, we're talking like 100 feet, 100 yards away. It's insane. And then you add into the fact that those upper middle class houses and families, they're able to donate more of their own liquid capital to certain school resources, certain fundraisers, you know, and drives and whatever. Whereas it's a lot harder to find an extra $1,000 or $500 or even $100 when you're living in a community that is oftentimes single parent. And again, that's not a slight, that's just an unfortunate fact of reality.
Mhm.
And the idea of donating $100 or $50 or $20 when the other option is I got to figure out how to feed my kid, it's a non-starter, right?
Exactly.
And then you take into account that the federal government only subsidizes roughly 9% of public school funding, which is in and of itself a kind of a sick joke, right?
An atrocity.
They want to they want to they want to use these talking points about how, you know, America is great, we are, you know, the smartest, we're the most technologically advanced, but if we're not putting the money into making sure that our children from all backgrounds are given the same, you know, egalitarian upbringing and opportunities, then are we really that great? It's hard to imagine that we are.
Well, it's tough because I think so. Our country is founded on this like invincible belief that we are, right? Because we started off with very humble beginnings. We beat the greatest empire in the world. So by humble, I'm joking.
Bro, how dare you.
But you know,
Roman Empire. Roman
once
Empire.
we do this, what was that?
The Roman Empire, son.
Actually, it was the Mongolian Empire. If we want to get into facts, it was
Well,
certainly the Mongolian
they were the
Empire.
biggest. They were the biggest, but the most industrious for their time was probably the Roman Empire.
I don't know about that, dude. I mean, Mongolian. It depends on how you measure great, but Roman Empire was
the
something.
Mongolian Empire was enormous. You can't even dispute the fact that they were.
It was
like,
the largest empire in the history of
terms
mankind.
in
Not even close.
In
It's not
terms
even
of
close.
size, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it really depends on how you measure empires. I would say the British Empire will outrank the Roman Empire most days of the week, just simply because. I mean, you've heard the quote, "The sun never sets on the British Empire," right? I mean, to have that large of or that large amount of landmass all over the world simultaneously and throughout history is just pretty incredible. But we start from this point, right? And we get to our apex, which is right after World War II, and when Winston Churchill famously says America now stands at the top of the world. And I think from there we change this mindset so that we're the best. And then somewhere along the lines, around the 2000s, 2010s, we actually stopped being the best. But the people in this country still believe that we're the best. And it's okay to have nationalism. It's okay to be prideful of your country. All of those things are fantastic. But the problem is you actually have to do the work, right? We're not number one in education. I think we're like 22nd in education now at this point, and we're slipping.
We're not even in the top 10 anymore of any meaningful.
This is the last time I checked, which was years ago, and we were like 22nd. So we could be even in the 30s, right? Obviously, with other other topics like healthcare, like how protected are you by your own government, right?
Look, dude, if your own government is not going to do two things, and that's protect itself and her interests and its people, and I think you could loop those things in together. But if the country that you live in isn't doing the bare minimum to offer you any sort of assistance to make sure that you are at least given life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, like not even like actual happiness, but the ability to pursue it because you're not worried about, breaking your leg and losing everything when going to an emergency room because,
right,
you're outside of your own fucking network. It's insane, man. How can you justify calling yourself anything great if you're not taking care of your own people? That's like, that doesn't even equate.
It's true. When walk it off or rub some dirt on it are literal solutions to your problems because you can't afford healthcare. I mean, that's sort of a big thing, right? But yeah.
And I think to your point, though, that kind of, in some ways, that is indicative of the sort of paradigm that we're living in where you have this anti-science movement. like believing in science is a belief for a lot of people, which doesn't even make fucking sense, right? Like you can, through scientific method, through actual analysis, through peer-reviewed studies, we can see why things are the way that they are. But some people just,
or at least have a good guess as to why, like a very most practical, obvious solution, right? This whole thing with the COVID, it's the other most disgusting thing of 2020. I don't really want to put it in the same category as police brutality and racial injustice, but it's 100% up there. And I think what scares me the most is this is where we're losing standing with the rest of the country. How we act with COVID, right? Other countries are literally laughing. This is not just joke. My wife is Brazilian. She's Chinese. She reads a lot of newspapers from both Brazil and China. And they're essentially laughing at us like, because we're toddlers, right? We're toddlers. What is the worst that can happen if it turns out that COVID isn't as serious as it is wearing a mask? What's the worst that can happen? You're inconvenienced by putting a mask on your face for a few days.
There's a pretty
the mask challenge. Have you seen that?
No, but there's a pretty apt axiom that I think goes into with what you just said, and that is that there is nothing more angry than an inconvenienced middle-class white person. This idea that wearing, and this happened at my store literally last week. There was a gentleman that was absolutely irate that we told him to put his mask on while he was in the store, and he started stomping around about his First Amendment rights and his civil liberties. The problem is that one, he was in a private place of business, so whatever the fuck he thinks exists in a private place of business means jack shit, because that private business can literally tell you to wear fucking feathers in the store if that's what gains you entry. now they have to apply that unilaterally to everybody that doesn't have a particular medical condition that prevents them from wearing feathers in the store. But so long as everyone of every background and every, like on an evil playing field is wearing and being told to wear the same attire to come to that store, that is the store's prerogative. You have no legal standing whatsoever. And furthermore, this idea that your rights can't be quote unquote infringed upon, sure, in general, that's true. However, every single state has adopted some form of clause that gives them a little bit of leeway when it comes to wartime situations or a natural disaster or a medical outbreak. There are limitations. It's like why you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Yeah, free speech is legitimate and is a real aspect of being an American, but that doesn't mean you just are granted carte blanche in every category just because it fucking offends you.
It's funny because actually that is probably the most American thing I've ever heard. Quote the First Amendment, but don't actually know what the First Amendment says. The First Amendment gives you the right of free, essentially anything, as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of other people. So if you're not wearing a mask, you're putting other people at risk. You are now infringing upon other people's rights to live and live healthily. It's that simple.
And not only that, but the existence of that particular amendment came about because the United States felt they couldn't say anything negative about the monarchy, which they felt was infringing upon their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, in essence, as long as the government isn't coming in and throwing you in jail for doing something that is a free speech motivated thing in a public setting, then technically your First Amendment has not been stomped upon anyways. Right. So this idea that you can just do what you want and say what you want. Yeah, okay, well, you can go outside and shoot somebody. That's your, I guess, right. But you'll go to jail because you're directly infringing on someone else's life and liberty. So by that same token, if you not wearing a mask potentially causes the same sort of harm to someone, whether you know it or not, that's on you. It's sort of like you can't break the law just because you didn't know what the law was.
Oh. You can, but anyway,
you'll be punished for it. Is my point. Like you can't use that as an excuse. Like, hey, I didn't know I couldn't steal from this person. Like, well, now you know. Happy 5 to 10.
No, yeah, exactly. No, it's sad. It really is. And I always tell these people, it's like, dude, what if the experts are right? What if the scientists who get paid to do this for a living are actually right? Right?
Or even within
you're putting yourself at risk, you're putting your family at risk, you're putting everybody at risk.
Or even with a margin of error, right? Like even if it's not like, even if the scientists aren't 100% right, and it would be hard to be 100% right about something so new as this particular strain of the coronavirus, it would be almost impossible to get it right within the first 6 months. That would be nothing short of a Herculean feat of human intuition, right? Mm-hmm. So, and like you said, what if the worst that happens is you have to wear a mask for a little while, and this isn't as bad as the Spanish flu, and this isn't as bad as the bird flu in 2003. The bird flu had a mortality rate of 40%, but it couldn't transmit. This thing currently, based on the number of people that have tested positive and the number of people that have died, has a mortality rate of about 4 to 5%, but fucking is able to live on surfaces for days.
Well, they've disproved that one. So the COVID can live on surfaces for it's less than 24 hours. It's much less than 24 hours. So
they vary depending on
initially they thought it would be about 3 days. But things like cardboard, it'll die within a few hours. Yeah. Again, my wife does this like all the time. This is all she does is like is pay attention. It can survive in the air, but the problem is the wind will blow air molecules around. So they're finding that it's not actually as harmful, I guess, or contagious as they thought. But the problem is if you put it into a crowded place, it has a very high transmission rate. And that alone means that as long as you're socially distancing, you should be okay. But when you're out in public, it is imperative to wear masks, right? It's imperative. You have to for yourself and your other people's safety.
Even if you don't want to do it for yourself. Like even if you don't want to do it for yourself, right? Even if you're not worried about yourself, what sort of individualistic, narcissistic attitude to where your ego is so affronted by the fact that wearing a mask will help keep other people safe, but you don't want to do it because it fucking hurts your freedom.
And that is why we're losing the respect. And I'm going to give you sort of another example that's somewhat similar, even though it's going to probably make you laugh. So I have a bunch of Trump supporters on my feed, and the reason why, I know we always say, oh, we could delete these people. No, 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 no. I need my daily laughs every single day. But not only that, but deleting people that you don't agree with never makes any sense, right? I want to see what they say. And one of them posted this thing that says, you are far, far, far more likely to be discriminated against for being a Trump supporter than for being a person of color, for being LGBT, all of these things, for being a woman. That's what the quote, that was what the meme said. And I went to the actual source, and thousands of people liked it. And oh, this is so true. This is what we're talking about with that white fragility. This is the first time in your life you've been inconvenienced for something. And let me say this: it's a choice that you've made. You've made a choice to be conservative. That's your choice. You don't choose to be gay. You don't choose to be black. You don't choose to be a woman. None of these things you can choose, but you can choose to be a Trump supporter, right? This is your first time being inconvenienced for something. To have any type of, I guess, basically for you, this is your barely brief moment of being a minority, right? And you already complaining like it's the worst thing in the world. Like, how can you have the audacity to say something? You simply don't know, right? This is the first time that a lot of middle-aged, white, privileged people have to do anything, wear a mask, and they can't handle it. They couldn't handle having to stay inside for shelter in place. They can't handle this because in their life, in their privileged life, they've never been told to do anything.
Here's the crazy thing, right? You have those same folks that are comparing wearing a mask and being inside for a while, unless you absolutely have to go outside for food or for exercise. They're comparing it to the Chinese internment camps. And we've been at this for 2.5, 3 months, depending on what part of the United States you live in. And you're in the comfort of your own house, and you're comparing that to being in an internment camp during World War II. Are you out of your fucking mind? Are you so obtuse in your fucking own self-absorbed lifestyle that the idea of being told to stay inside for a while because perhaps maybe you won't get sick, but you could transmit it to a bunch of people that you care about that maybe are immunocompromised or are within the spectrum of people that are most adversely reacting to this problem? Your first thought is my fucking freedom and I'm the same as a Japanese internment person. Get the fuck out of here with that, dude. What the fuck are you even saying?
I will say this, and I don't mean to be somebody who generalizes, making a hasty generalization. That's not what I intend to do. But I've noticed that it seems that more people who are complaining about the mask situations and having to stay at home are middle-aged to older adults that follow a certain demographic, right? And I feel like it's just a changing of the times. Like there's always this grass, and it's always that same population that fails to want to change the times. Like if you look back in the 1800s when we had the Civil War, right? Slavery was already outdated by the time the Civil War started. Okay, the cotton gin. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin several years before the Civil War. That effectively killed slavery. There was no need for it. Slavery at that point became costly and ineffective. But you have a population who doesn't want to get rid of slavery, right? You can take this to segregation, right? The same population doesn't want to get rid of segregation, even though the rest of the world's doing it. This same population just wants to combat everything that's progressive. Doesn't matter what it is. They want to live, I guess, like Neanderthals and never change, right? Because they get so comfortable living, like they think living life a certain way that they just they fight change no matter what it is. And so in this situation, it's like, dude, you got to wear a mask. That's all you got to do.
Well,
I don't want to do it.
I think right. There's a pretty apropos saying that centers on that idea, and it's this idea that the last gasp of a dying thought or a dying movement is most incendiary and flammable right as it's dying, right? So this idea of like the reason why we're seeing sort of these crimes creep up and you're seeing sort of this last gasp of racial inequity being touted by the right as a democratic trope is in fact because they know that this institution that grants them favor in a lot of ways, whether it's, overtly or subvertly, is dying, and they need to hold on to it because otherwise their entire, like whatever peg they had to stand on will be taken away.
They don't want to lose that because you're just like the rest of us. So we get to see how bad you are without the advantage, and I don't think anybody could really right. handle that.
That's another funny thing that I've seen is I keep seeing posts, and this post keeps circulating over and over again on Facebook, but it's basically this notion that the reason why you're so upset is because you've had all these fucking advantages as a white person, and look what you've fucking done with your life.
You've done nothing. You're just in the same spot, bro.
Yeah.
And all you had to do, it doesn't matter if you're successful, if you're not successful, all you have to do not hate others, and you wouldn't get clowns. So I can't feel bad about it. Like, simple, don't discriminate, and no one's going to dislike you. Nobody.
Yeah,
This
and
is
I
the
think that
progressive world that we're getting to, and you have to look around, look at other countries. It's going to take time, but you're slowly defeating racism everywhere. You're slowly defeating homophobia everywhere. You're slowly defeating, this masculine dominant society everywhere, slowly. If we're not going to catch up to the rest of the world, everybody's just going to cut us off, man. And we used to think this notion was impossible. 10 years ago, it wasn't possible. But we got this other big empire in the world by the name of China, the People's Republic of China, who's happy to hand out the money that we don't want to hand out anymore. And we are losing so much ground to this. And I don't want to turn this into competition. I personally love China. I think it's great. I think it's great for both countries to build themselves up and build the rest of the world up. But we're handing off our dominance to them. I'll give you an example. The transatlantic or the trans-Pacific trade agreement, TAFTA, we pulled out of it because Mr. Businessman, Donald Trump, he didn't like that, as with a lot of the trade deals that he's pulled us out of. He didn't like the limited money in, what am I trying to say? He didn't like our end of the deal, right? And a lot of our deals, I will agree to his logic that we kind of sort of get the shit end of the stick, right? Because the idea is to build up other countries and to, spread our cultural dominance, right? That's part of kind of winning the game. New Zealand is one of our greatest trade partners, right? They provide fish, as well as like lamb, as we know from Pet Food Express, to the entirety of the world. They came out and famously said, "Look, we don't want to trade with China. We don't. We love you, America. But if you're not going to trade with us, we have to go somewhere." Now, by reluctance sake, we have to trade with China.
If you're not going to sell me water, I still have to drink. So I got to go somewhere to get it.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, dude, I think you're totally right, and I do think there were a lot of trade deals and opportunities that the United States ran too far with, and perhaps were even too forgiving in that respect. And I think that to his credit, there were certainly areas that we could have improved with that regard. But the idea that we are at the top of this pyramid and our goal is to stay at the top, you are only as strong as the bottom of the pyramid, right? And if the bottom of the pyramid is not being brought up and not being reinforced, there's no way you can stay at the top. And there's no way you will stay at the top, because eventually the king's getting pushed off the hill for whoever's willing to bring the rest up, right?
That's exactly right. Sorry, I'm just checking on my baby here. No, that's exactly right. And I'll give you some kind of headway into that. President Xi in Chinese newspapers are famously talking about how badly they want Trump to win the re-election, how badly they do, because it's their time to shine. And they know it. Over the last 4 years, the United States has seceded so much territorial dominance and so much cultural, financial dominance over the world that, I mean, pretty much everybody, right? Like, we all know that the USSR, sorry. I was just having a World War II discussion with somebody just yesterday, so I'm now saying the USSR. We know that the Russian Federation, obviously, and China, they want to devalue the American dollar really badly. And over the last 4 years, it's never been worse. As in terms of not so much that the dollar is dying, but the rest of the country's monetary gains, like the Chinese yen, is becoming more so dominant, right? And if we continue to punt our agreements, if we continue to punt our relationships, look at our three closest allies, the UK, France, and Germany, they don't really like us at this point. Angela Merkel never gets mad at anybody, and she hates Donald Trump, right?
I mean, to be fair, though, the French don't like anybody.
Exactly.
It's just varying levels of how much they don't like you. And right now we're nearing the top of that list.
We're getting there, and it's not really the list that we wanted to be on the top of, right? Because France has the fourth most powerful military in the world. I think Germany has 6, and the UK is like 8.
Look what happened when Italy was going through, when Italy was the epicenter of this pandemic. They needed PPE and equipment, and the first country that was able to give them anything was basically Russia. And the only reason I know this is because my dad, who is Italian, who gives me that who follows that news and can read it better than I can, was basically saying to me, look, if America is not going to do what America claims itself to be, Italy doesn't give a fuck, dude. We switched sides in the middle of World War II. We'll switch sides right the fuck now. We don't give a shit.
World War I, they definitely switched sides in the middle of the World War. one. Here's another note: the current epicenter of the coronavirus, besides the U.S., of course, is in Brazil.
Yeah, Brazil.
Brazil's going to have the vaccine faster than we are, right? Because they're partnering with China. Because the United States is like, meh, on Brazil, and we certainly don't want to work with China to make sure that they're the ones that discover first. Well, whether we do it first or they do it first, bottom line is China will probably have a vaccine faster than us, and they're going to distribute this to Brazil. The people in a poor third world country will probably have access to vaccines because China is happy to help individuals that need the help, where basically they're happy to play the role that we have claimed that we'd like to play for the last 200 or 100 years. So it's just losing that ground. And at some point people are going to realize, you wake up and you realize, oh wait, we don't really need this, right? We don't really need America to meddle in all of our affairs. We don't really need America's support. So can you take your military base out of our country? Can you stop trading? We don't really want to trade as well, with these agreements with you as well. You know what I'm saying? It's a slippery slope that we're sort of spiraling down, and it's a little scary.
Yeah. I mean, I would be curious to know what your wife thinks actually about some of the, and there's some, I don't know if you actually read the article that I sent you from Medium from that guy, Yuri Dagan, about the whole SARS-CoV-2 and its connection to the pangolin strain, to the bat strain, and how they're both pretty similar in a lot of the nucleotides to this virus, but then they have certain furin sites and cleavage sites that don't quite make sense. And the reason that this doesn't make sense is because there's a level 4 biolab which focuses and studies a lot on coronaviruses, specifically bat coronaviruses, among others. And the site where the outbreak started in China was at a wet market, like 200 yards away from where this biolab is. And what sort of baffles me is this notion that, and not to say that it did begin there or that it came from this biolab specifically and I don't think it was a bioweapon. Like, I'll just say that right now. I don't think it was a bioweapon. I think these labs are working on viruses all the time.
Mm.
And anything can happen. It's happened in the United States before, where the military accidentally sent some fucking anthrax. And then there was the original SARS, which somehow got out of a lab, in some small isolated sites. So this notion that I'm hearing from the scientific community en masse, which is just that there's no way that it could ever have accidentally been, like, someone couldn't have accidentally contracted it from whatever they were working on in that lab and then somehow taken it outside of the lab, or somehow it got out naturally on its own. The notion that you should just dismiss that evidence just because it doesn't fit whatever the narrative is, just to me seems crazy. And because I can't read Chinese, I can't dive super deep into the actual reports from Chinese newspapers and whatnot. So that's something that I would be curious to think, if you know offhand, what Mila thinks about that possibility.
Well, I think that Mila is very convinced that the coronavirus was actually brought into China by Americans and American soldiers. I think this is her claim. And, for Chinese, for better or for worse, they're incredibly prideful and they will always listen to the Chinese newspaper, whether this right or wrong. But I think they have a very tremendous feeling that this didn't intentionally begin in China, but it was used to sort of, because look what's happened. There's a lot more mistrust in China because we knew exactly how China would, how China would react to this, right? Whether the disease itself is their fault, which, I mean, who cares?
It's conjecture. It's just like
conjecture.
Like, here's the thing is there are a lot of very interesting, far off possibilities that all seem to have happened in sequence that makes it almost either seem too perfect to have started there as a Chinese accident. Right. But then by the same token, anytime you bring up the possibility that maybe it did happen this way, or maybe, like you said, the US had some weird sort of covert CIA operation that released this virus that is some chimera of SARS and, like, from bats and pangolin SARS with no intermediary host to sort of bridge the gap between those two viruses, seems almost too good to be fucking true that it happened right there in Wuhan, 200 feet away from a security level 4 biolab at a wet market.
That's kind of
and pangolins don't live there, and neither do the bats. Pangolins are typically found in more sandy areas, right? Like, that's kind of what they've been. That's their ecosystem. And bats are fucking cave dwellers. So how the fuck are you gonna have a pangolin ever come in contact with a bat? I'll tell you what, it's probably not in a fucking cave. It's probably in either a wet market, which, they're probably not. I mean, that's probably as likely or, equally likely as them being squeezed together in close proximity inside a lab, because natural selection takes place no matter where the fuck you are. It doesn't have to be outside. It can be inside. It's like the whole, the whole rats they've been studying at, John Hopkins University, where their telomeres were extended, and they thought that was a natural thing that mice had going on. And they come to find out that mice in the wild actually don't have long telomeres. That was something that they developed in captivity so that they could live longer, because they were being bred at young ages and then basically thrown in the garbage can. So as a defense mechanism, they naturally selected to develop longer telomeres. So to say that there is no possibility that in a biolab where you had these animals potentially coming in close contact, that they couldn't have somehow gone through some sort of natural selection there, and that's an impossibility, and that it only could have happened in the wild, just doesn't make a lot of sense. There's a lot of what ifs, and it blows my mind. I've been reading a lot about this shit too.
So here's the thing. These things take decades to happen, right? Decades. So if Corona actually happened in the wild, it probably started in about 1970. And it, to this point, is finally gotten to the point where it transmit, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that wholeheartedly. If it started that way naturally, that's how it works. That's how it worked. It started evolving this way back in like the 70s. The thing is, it's just too perfect. Like I was about to say, you can't predict what would happen with the disease, but what you can predict based on the governmental structure of China is how they would respond to it. We know China's a little bit secretive about what they do, right? And they want to look really good on the world stage. So we know that they would probably hide or mislead, misconstrue the numbers. We know that, right? And this isn't a knock on China. It's just, that's how they work, right? That's what they do. They know that they have a lot more at stake, to lose on this world stage, right? And I think that becomes kind of my issue is it makes it seem like that would be the reason why you would plant something there, because you can predict how it would go. China would probably misconstrue the numbers, and the world would lose trust in favor with China, right? And who does that benefit? Only the United States, right?
Well, and to your point, I think that is not hegemonic to China. I think every world power has, in and of itself, an interest to
that's true,
to deliver a message that they feel will be most well received to the international community. The USA does it all the time. And that's why, decades later, you have declassified documents where you're like, oh, actually, maybe there was a UFO sighting in this area, or some sort of unidentified object that the Navy saw that we, kept under wraps for decades because we didn't want the public to freak out about it. We didn't want the rest of the world to think that we were, a bunch of fucking alien chasing crazies, right?
Yeah.
You also have stories about, Vietnam, the My Lai massacre, things that were kind of hidden from the public view because the US didn't want to be seen as this behemoth of inciting its own will upon impoverished countries just because we have the authoritarian mindset and the power to do so. So I think that's not necessarily a singular ideal for China. That's a global phenomenon.
You're right. That is right. I think I probably misspoke there. I think to kind of what I meant is more so that you can absolutely predict the way. I think to the specific sort of way that China would go about sort of hiding, or not hiding, but I guess tailoring the numbers based on how they do this with a lot of other subjects and topics, would build that level of mistrust or sort of reignite it, right? For example, if this happened in America, we'd probably just look like bumbling fucking idiots who couldn't get the raps on. But we know China is probably the most efficient country in the world. So because of that, we know that we could play, what is it, probable cause. We could play stupid and say, hey, we didn't know anything, so we just reported these numbers wrong and poorly. People probably eat that shit up. But China's like, no, you guys are way too smart for that. So you're doing this on purpose, right? But to your point, you're absolutely right. If this started in, Czechoslovakia, or I'm sorry, the Czech Republic. I guess Czechoslovakia is not a thing anymore. If it started in the Czech Republic, the same way it would go, right? You probably hide the numbers a little bit and try to make yourself look a little bit better, like you weren't just the cause of one of the worst global pandemics.
We basically didn't want to test people for the first 2 months this shit was going on. So how many
still don't?
So how many people could have died between January and late March when we weren't testing anybody? And that's the thing that I get into arguments with my friends about, right? Like, if you want to talk about a real conspiracy theory, and I don't even really like that term, if there's actual science and substance to the argument, I would call it more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? But it's not quite a conspiracy theory because there's actually reason and logic behind it. So for me, when I first started reading about it, my first thought was there's no way that it came from a lab, blah, 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 blah. But then as you start reading more information, I would say I'm probably a little bit more open to the idea that it could have at least, and again, not created in a lab as a means to create a bioweapon, because if they wanted to create an effective bioweapon, something that only kills 5% of the population that gets sick is a really horrible fucking way to go about it, right? You'd want something that would be highly transmissible and highly, like, and have a high mortality rate,
Yeah,
right?
and probably in a whole disgusting way too, like you bleed from your eyes or something. You know what I'm saying? So it looks
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, like you would want it to have the same sort of effect as sarin gas. You want it to be fucking visible and brutal. You don't want it to be, oh, you know, this person got a flu-like symptom and then suddenly died, right? That wouldn't be, I think, an effective bioweapon, at least not in perpetuity. But in this particular respect, I will say that just reading more about the weird chimera that has evolved from this and how it has an incredible similarity to pangolins in a certain segment of the recepting binding motif and the recepting binding domain of a fucking bat-based COVID virus or a SARS virus, and the fact that there is a biolab that works on this, and the fact that the site was so close to it, I will give more credence to the idea that an accidental leak or an accidental exposure from the community because of the biolab nearby holds a little bit more weight than the idea that it is entirely naturally selected. It
Yeah.
just, and again, I'm willing to say that I don't know, and and we probably will never know for sure unless we find some sort of intermediary host that bridges the gap between pangolins and bats. But as it stands right now, I can't possibly, in good faith, say that there is zero possibility that it wasn't being worked on in a lab for potentially benevolent reasons, right? They could have been combining these different strains to see how it would react on organ tissue, how to react on the nervous system, just to see, okay, if there is somehow a bridge between these two novel viruses, we need to be ready for it. You know, if
For
these
sure.
two things somehow come in contact and a new virus comes about, if we can preemptively predict what this virus may do and what it may morph into, we can be more well suited to have a vaccine ready or to have some sort of medical journal that can help people move forward in a much quicker capacity versus flying by the seat of our pants and hoping that these things never merge, which, as we know, with natural selection, the more things come in close contact with each other, the more nature is, is shrunk down into smaller spaces. You have more of these species coming into contact that they never otherwise would have because there's nowhere else for them to go. They can't go into cities because they're getting killed by people.
Exactly.
This shit's going to be more and more common. And the idea that, you want to just throw out the notion that this could have happened in that facility or nearby, just, to me, is not a good faith discussion. If you want to tell me why that's wrong, but then give a little bit of a tip of the hat to, okay, well, there are a lot of coincidences which in and of themselves are very possible on their own. But when you start adding up, when you start multiplying like a fraction by itself over and over and over again, it gets fucking smaller exponentially. So you have to weigh that.
Mm-hmm. And this is what epidemiologists do. It's a word that I have difficulty saying. Epidemiologists do, right? They try to predict diseases and build vaccines prior to, right? So when these things come out, it's like we're already ready for it, right? So yeah, the fact that it's probably created, and I think logically we can almost deduce that it was probably created, right? Unless it was a mosquito that bit a fucking bat that bit, a pangolin, and
Well, and even then, right? Like it's
even that wouldn't work. That wouldn't work, right?
And even if it could work, so the idea that people come in contact with novel strains of illnesses all the fucking time, but because that one person has a particular deficiency in their immune system that allows them to be receptive to that particular strain, that doesn't necessarily mean it's transmittable to a large group of people, right? Like, and people come in contact with this stuff all the time, especially if you're working in, wet markets or out in the wild and you're dealing with these, new species that have their own illnesses. It's totally, it's not out of the realm of possibility that someone can get sick, but they never transmit the disease because the disease itself hasn't gone through enough natural selection to know how to bind to a particular host.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this thing could have come from a pangolin bat hybrid, but the idea that it would have been so immediately ready to just jump from species to human, and then from human to human to human to human to human, like a line of dominoes, is it's hard to wrap your mind around. And again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm just a fucking armchair biologist who likes to read about this kind of stuff, but I don't have the degrees. But personally, I would say that you can't rule out anything at this point. And the idea, and if anyone tells you that this is impossible, except the only thing I will say is impossible is that it's not fucking 5G. 5G is not causing the coronavirus. Shut the fuck up.
5G is definitely not. And the other thing that I'm going to tell you straight up is not a hoax from the Democrats to like overthrow Donald Trump. And I'm tired of hearing that fucking thing too, because I don't think the whole world, like I said earlier, the whole world's not in on trying to get Donald Trump out. The whole world might be in on trying to keep Donald Trump in. That's the only thing that's going to be happening, right? It's the only kind of conspiracy there is. So stop with this everybody's against this type bullshit. 5G didn't cause this. Bats aren't wireless. Your cell phone isn't going to fucking kill you. Just stop that shit. Like, I'm tired. I'm tired of hearing.
It's so hard to have that discussion with people, man.
Once they say that, it's like, okay, so we've now removed the intelligence. So let's also make conspiracies. Like, no, actually, it's the aliens. Optimus Prime, he died a few years ago, so he's no longer defending us from these like Decepticon fucking, coronavirus having ass motherfuckers. That's where it gets a little frustrating. It gets hard to talk about. Basically any conspiracy other than the fact that you should stay home and wear a mask is really hard to talk to individuals at that point. Well, I think logic goes out the window, and it's now just all pride and emotion.
That's I think where the crux of the problem lies. Is it lies within this idea that you can't have a good faith argument with somebody who doesn't want to have an actual discussion.
Correct.
Right? You can't disagree on positions and have a moving of the minds if both sides aren't willing to be at least open and receptive to what the other side is saying.
Right.
And that goes both ways, right? Just because you want to believe that every government and every rich person and every person that runs an institution is inherently evil, which is in and of itself a horrible fallacy to make. You can't just assume that everybody's evil, just like you can't assume that everybody's benevolent with their resources. Mm-hmm. But this idea that if you don't think that this conspiracy theory is right, or if you believe that the US is inherently only good or only bad, you can't have that sort of duopoly in your mind. That's not the way that you should function. You have to be able to understand that not everyone's going to think the same way, and that the only way you can come to some sort of reasonable understanding is by having an open and good faith conversation, hopefully moving the needles closer together. You're never going to get from here to here in one conversation. You get from here, maybe to here, to here. Maybe sometimes you go back a little bit, and then you keep moving the needle. You're not going to change someone overnight. You're not an evangelical. They're the only ones that can somehow go from being horrible sinners to saints through prayer overnight.
I think a good start is to maybe listen to the experts. Like, I get there's probably a lot of money at stake. So if Fauci says, hey, this vaccine's probably going to work, he's probably going to pay him, because we know, for example, we know that Fauci actually has his own medical company, which I feel like is a conflict of interest. But I get that it sounds and smells like conspiracy, but at the same time,
he donated a bunch of money to the WHO.
Well, that's too. But at the end of the day, it's like these people really truly do want to help. At the end of the day, to some extent, even if it's the only sake is because they want you to buy that vaccine that works, they want to be the one to discover it. At point blank, we have a problem and they want to solve it. So I think when they tell you stay inside, wear a mask type of shit, you're not going to get hypoxia like that meme that's going around that says you're going to get hypoxia. Let me ask a quick question. If hypoxia is a real thing, and that's when you breathe in too much carbon dioxide, as so it presumes, right? Surgeons perform surgery for 18 to 24 plus hours routinely.
Straight.
If this was a thing, these guys do this all the time. They would die. You would have to have a new invention for how to keep yourself safe in surgery, right?
Well,
otherwise all your surgeons would die.
And here's another, thought experiment that we can do, in 5 minutes or less. So when is a person's most formative time of their life? It's typically from birth through about 6 or 7 years old, right? Your brain is developing at a rapid rate. Your immune system is learning how to fight things off. So when people walk around talking about how if we're stuck inside, if we're always wearing a mask, if we're not exposing our bodies to viral loads and giving our immune system tools to fight, we're going to be more ill-equipped to handle any sort of outbreak in the future. And to that I say, first of all, you're out of your fucking mind, because this isn't a bubble boy experiment. If you were a regular kid growing up and you were exposed to dirt and you were exposed to getting sick, by the time you've reached 30, 35, unless you're literally intubated for years and years and years on end and you're never exposed to anything, like we're talking about decades of regression. There's almost no way that over the course of 3 months, your immune system will suddenly decide, well, I've never been exposed in this last 3 months, I'm going to stop working now. That's not how it fucking works. That's not how it works. Right. Medically speaking, your immune system forms the ability to fight off disease in the earliest part of your life. So what the fuck are you talking about? And if you bring that up, it's like, well, you know, there's certain studies that you can point to and whatever. And I'm like, well, give me those studies. And it's never a study. It's always some fucking crazy bitch who lives in the fucking woods on YouTube who's like, look, I eat guano 3 meals a day and I'm fucking super healthy and I snort vitamin C. But now let me tell you why these medical experts are wrong. And me with my degree in sunshine healing knows more than they do.
Yeah, it's actually just a certificate in sunshine. She didn't even finish the program, actually.
Dude, she went to a fucking Photoshop class, made herself a little fucking plaque, and then printed it out.
But this is where we get our resources from. Or that dude, like you mentioned once, that guy that barely graduated high school who has an opinion. That seems, he called it a hoax. So, you know, it's probably a hoax.
People, if nothing else, are creatures of tribes and confirmation bias, man. You want to be part of something because being by yourself, no one wants to feel like a leper. You don't want to feel like you're ostracized. But fuck, man, at the expense of logic and reason, that is a huge problem.
This is why there are black Trump supporters. This is why there are gay Trump supporters. This is why there are female Trump supporters, basically, because you just want to be a part of something so bad that you forget the logic of everything about this party is doing nothing for you. And yet you just want to be a part of something and feel good. And the white people that are, you know, they love these kind of people because they can be like, oh, look, here's our gay boy example who's a Trump supporter, see? But, you know, it's always nice to have.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. You know what? My girl and I have been talking about how for sure in the next 5 years or less, probably even less than that, like probably about 3 years or so, we're getting the fuck out, dude.
We are too.
Get out, dude. I can't anymore, dude. Especially if our boy, honestly, if either of these boys gets elected, why can't they both just have coronaries right before the election? Wouldn't that just be like fucking great? Like Trump gets sick with COVID and becomes invalid, and Joe Biden's dementia just finally takes over, and he's just.
But only if they die on the same day, like I think Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Only if they do something cool like that, and you know, like lifelong rivals die on the same day right before they put
dude.
Yeah.
What a fucking cluster, dude. How do we end up with these two absolutely and megalomaniacs, man? That's the best way to describe them. They're just fucking out of their minds, dude. I can't.
Because we don't want to see something different.
We don't want the mirror being held up at us and showing that, hey, in fact, it's pretty much all old white people running the show.
We want people who were alive during World War II to run our country, and because they're so connected with
they're the greatest generation, Mike.
They're just so unconnected from what we want. Honestly, we should have CEOs from Silicon Valley in charge of this country because they know exactly.
Dude, look, here's a fucking novel idea. How about you actually have a teacher that works in like inner cities running the education department, because she knows what it'll take to get everyone a good education. She will know what resources they need. We don't need someone who who owns her own fucking hedge fund running shit.
Look at Canada. The Department of Education is run by like a former teacher. The Department of Immigration is run by an immigrant. The Department of like race relations is led by a minority. The Department of like women feminism is things make sense. It's not just an old generic white guy in charge of every little thing. It's people who have experience. The Department of Science is run by, guess what? A scientist.
America's a fucking monolith of old white guys and gals who occupy the highest and most powerful positions in the entire country at the expense of everyone's fucking well-being, dude. There's no reason anybody should have a lifetime appointment on the fucking, like, you should never be able to be a lifetime senator. You should never be able to be a lifetime House person. It just doesn't make any fucking sense, dude.
What's even worse about the senator thing too, what's even worse is even if you don't have a lifetime, right? Even if you don't continuously get reelected, you spend 6 years in office, right? And say like I think the minimum age is like 35 to be a senator. You say 6 years, you're 42 years old, you quit. You get paid that $250,000 plus salary for the rest of your life. Tell me how that makes any sense. We can't get money for education, but we could spend millions of dollars paying the salaries of people who are no longer working.
And not to mention, like, on top of that, they're fucking double dipping. They're collecting that fucking pension while they're also working on the board of some other fucking agency, right? Lobbying for oil, lobbying for whatever.
Probably writing a book too on top of all that. Like, these people are making fat fucking stacks of money and they're not necessarily doing anything. That's where the problem is. We can't find. We wouldn't even have to defund the police if we could just take money from the politicians that they don't deserve to have.
And who the fuck is footing that bill? It's definitely not them. That would be you. That'd be me.
Just remember, your taxes, when you see your taxes, some of that money is going to a senator who's no longer a senator. Just remember that.
Yeah,
That'll be the
it's
fifth
funding
top
some
moment today.
initiative, or it's funding the idea of some initiative that is never going to get put into place because all these fucking politicians talk out of both sides of their mouths. Like, yeah, we really want to help the inner city kids, but also put in an Amazon fucking delivery warehouse in the middle of fucking San Leandro. You know what? No, you're full of shit, dude. You are paying lip service, and I think that is like literally at the top of every fucking resume for every politician is I pay lip service. I talk out of both sides of my mouth. Oh,
I'm really charming.
off those two boxes, come on down. No, charming's not one of them.
Really,
if charming was one of them, Ted Cruz would not be a fucking senator. That guy's.
No, there's other reasons. There's certainly others. Some of them are just idiots, and their fan base is just equally stupid. But a lot of them are just very charming, charismatic individuals who can say exactly what their people want to hear. Like Trump's not articulate. He's not particularly eloquent, but he says exactly what his followers want him to say. Right? I've said this many times. Trump supporters don't care what Trump does for them. Trump supporters only care about what Trump does against the people they don't like. And Trump is very good at playing that game. Do I think Trump's a racist? Actually, no. Do I think he's a homophobe? Absolutely not. I don't. I truly don't believe those. But he knows that his followers want a racist and a homophobe in office. So he's going to continue to play those roles. He's going to continue to not condemn those type of things. He's going to continue to rise up that division because that's what's going to get him reelected.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
You don't think there's even a little bit of racist in that, man?
I don't really. I mean, only as much as anybody is a little bit racist. Like if you're walking down the street and you're like, "Oh my God, Asians can't drive," or no, this is what I'm saying. Look. Everybody wants to play like they're innocent, right? And this is where we all need to take a fucking reality check. But if you've ever said Asians can't drive, if you've ever said, "Oh, that black person's probably going to steal something," if you ever said Mexicans are lazy, you're a little bit racist too. And I think to some extent that's probably okay because we don't really mean it, or we don't want to actually go out there and exterminate other races. But everybody's going to have that little bit of race. But Donald Trump grew up in New York City. He had a lot of friends that were black people. I don't think I can, without question, say that he's an absolute racist. I don't believe there's anything in his DNA that says that he should be a racist or that he is definitively a racist. Do I think he's a sex offender? Absolutely. And I don't give I will try to justify that. But do I think he's racist? I can't. I just think he plays that role incredibly well. And his followers eat that shit up like potato chips on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Possibly, man. I mean, some of the comments that he's made in the past could be construed as at least racist in their nature. But
he's a politician. We won't accept something when a politician tells you something good, like, "Oh, I want to do this for the people." We don't necessarily accept that shit. So if he calls Mexican rapists, like, I think it's incredibly horrific that he says shit like that. But do I think he means it? Maybe not as much as he means, some of the other things. And I'm not justifying, please, let me put that on the record. I'm not justifying this man. I don't think what he does or says or any of that stuff is even remotely acceptable. But I think that we do hold, obviously, people to a higher standard when they're in a position of light. And, I think that a lot of what he does and says is really just to get a recast vote as opposed to that's how he actually thinks. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm suggesting. But that he does this in his position is absolutely unacceptable. And the things he says are, regardless, absolutely unacceptable. I know for a fact that his followers don't follow him if he doesn't say these dumbass things.
I think regardless of whether he is or isn't racist, one thing that it would be almost irrefutable to say is that he is a huge piece of shit. Just in the way that he carries himself, right? This whole bombastic, egomaniacal way about him is not conducive to progress. And I understand that his entire platform is the allure of progressivism in terms of how he wants to bolster the Republican Party and the people that he is telling are disenfranchised, when in reality, if you're white, you're not disenfranchised. You can shut the fuck up with that argument. But, he plays that role incredibly well. I think to your point, he knows how to play to a crowd. He is effectively Joaquin Phoenix from fucking The Gladiator, where, he may not be the smartest, he may not be anything, but one thing he does know how to do is he knows how to play to the mob.
Yeah, for sure. Absolute facts. And it's unfortunate. It's purely unfortunate because a lot of people are suffering as a result. And because of this racial divide, I think a lot of individuals are getting hurt because a lot of these things that are happening, people wouldn't have been ballsy enough to do it under a different president, under a different society, in a different atmosphere. And all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of shit that people are now like, "Oh my God, the president says this stuff, I can do it." And that's what's making it not okay. Whether you're playing a role or whether I'm just wrong and he truly is a racist piece of shit. Either way, you're right, he is a piece of shit. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. What you're doing is causing pain, is causing suffering. And
his actions have a direct fomenting effect on people's unease with what's going on in the world. And whether it's fanning the flames of, you as white nationalist Americans are losing your place in the world, or it's fanning the flames of police brutality and saying that I am the president of law and order, and whatever's going on with you guys, yeah, that's important, but it's not as important as me keeping law and order. All he's doing is adding fodder to that fire, man. He's burning it bright because he knows that if he keeps this up, the chances of him being reelected, and I think at this point, it's like, I would say it's an 80-20 shot that he gets reelected. Like there's a chance that he won't, but you basically have a literal fucking puppet in Joe Biden, who is probably being held up by computers and screws, because that guy has fallen off a cliff in terms of mental fortitude.
It's
and for me at this point, by gritting my teeth, it's almost like, fuck, dude, I can't vote for Trump because I can't vote for Biden. So I'm voting strictly on the possibility of who his vice president's going to be and who his court nominees are going to be for the highest courts in the country. Like that is the only saving grace that I have.
Kamala Harris, almost uncertainty now, especially now that Amy Klobuchar is out. It's got to be Kamala Harris. It has to be. And that's a disaster in and of itself too. But what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? I think
we're leaving the country. That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. Brazil or New Zealand. That's where I'll be at. I know I'll see you in Italy.
Then you guys can come visit us in Italy, and we'll just, we'll trade 6 months of the year. We'll fly back and forth.
Perfecto. I think my kiddo's starting to wake up. That's why for anybody watching at home, I have a baby, and that's her sleeping.
Look at that little nugget.
I was going to tell you about this last time. So this is my little camera app, and then her bed is a moving bed. So it self-soothes. So I press the button, and she starts soothing.
What world that we live in, dude? I have to soothe my baby. Hold on. Let me fucking play on my screen.
Product recommendations. This is Nanit camera, and this is Snoo. This is what it's called. It's the Snoo crib, soothing bed. Maybe we'll get a little sponsorship money there.
Snoo, help us out, Snoo.